Good afternoon to everyone on the call. Good morning to those in the West Coast, and good day to everyone else in other time zones. My name is Mike Salvarez. I'm the Vice President of Content Development at the MER Conference. Welcome to today's MER Sapient webinar, New Challenges Facing the Modern Day Records Manager, brought to you by ZL Technologies. And I want to just ask everyone to please hold on for a moment or two. We'll get started in about a minute. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone on the call. Welcome to today's webinar from MER Sapient, the new challenges facing the modern day records manager, brought to you by the MER Sapient group as well as ZL Technologies. My name is Mike Salvarez. I'm the Vice President of Content Development at the MER Conference, and it really is my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar today, our first one of the year 2019, and I'm so happy to see all of you on the call today. Before we get started, let me just go through a couple of administrative details. First of all, you might be interested in asking a question throughout the webinar today. And if you are so inclined, please use the question button on your GoToWebinar control panel. Type in your question and the speakers will do their very best to address that question either during the presentation or at the conclusion of the presentation. And if there is not enough time to address your question, they will get back to you after the webinar concludes at some point in the very near future to address your question. I want to just point out that the MER Sapient webinars are brought to you not only by the MER conference, but also in this case by ZL Technologies. But for those of you who have never been to the MER conference, let me share a couple of pieces of information for you. The MER conference is held in May in Chicago, May 20th through 22nd. It is a conference focused on information governance and records management. If you've never been there before, I encourage you to please consider attending this year. We have a plethora of world-class speakers and very compelling content to share with you at that conference. Early bird pricing expires at the end of the month, so please log on to our website and take advantage of the very best pricing if you are inclined to be going to that conference. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with a link to the recording at the conclusion of the webinar, and that gives you the chance to either replay the webinar if there's something you missed or something you want to hear again, or to share with a colleague or a friend that wasn't able to attend today. You'll also be receiving a certificate of attendance through an email that you'll get with a link that will document your attendance at today's webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our host, Callum Core from ZL Technologies. He's an information governance specialist. He will introduce our panel and lead us through today's very interesting topic. So Cal, the microphone is all yours.
Absolutely. Thank you as always, Mike, and to the MER team as well. We do really appreciate this opportunity and obviously very excited to share some intriguing thoughts with you all today. And I just want to run you through a couple of administrative things from our side quickly and a little bit of an agenda. But before I get there, I just want to reiterate what Mike said with regards to the question side of things. You know, one of the best things about the records management industry is really the willingness to share information and share perspectives and have conversations that we don't necessarily get to have across the information governance industry as a whole. So we really do encourage you throughout this presentation to jump into that chat box and share some of your thoughts. If the questions really relate to the topic or the conversation that's being had at that moment, we'll do our best to field those questions. But as mentioned, we do have time at the end, and we'll see to that. And I'm also lucky to have a very diligent ZL Technologies team on board who are recording all of our questions. So we don't manage to answer them today. I promise we'll reach out by email and we can have a further conversation. But just to run you through quickly what you're all going to be listening to today, I promise I will do far less talking than I do on this slide, and you can get rid of this funny accent in no time. And I'll introduce you to my two extremely more qualified colleagues who are on the phone as well today. And what we're going to be diving into once we get through those introductions is really some of the driving factors that we've seen have caused change across our industry. Obviously, it's been a fairly interesting time across information governance as a whole for the last year and a half. And some of those issues are extremely well publicized, and we've all been tackling those on a daily basis. And it's conversations that we have at every trade show or conference that we attend, but we really want to get into the meat of those issues and get a better understanding of what is causing them and what opportunities and aspirations we can really take out of them. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the RIM and eDiscovery relationship and ultimately the process. We really feel like with my colleagues on the phone today that this is a new opportunity that has arisen for a number of different reasons in the past couple of months, if not year. And really, what does this mean for the RIM industry as a whole? And again, how can we take advantage of that? And then towards the end, we'll really start to finish off with, okay, we've presented an opportunity. We understand why this opportunity is on the table, but how do I best take advantage of that? Do I ultimately need to be having conversations in-house, or is there technology and tools that can utilize me in that process to take advantage of what seems to be a pretty exciting opportunity? And then, as mentioned at the beginning of this slide, we'll also field some time for questions. So with no further ado, thank you all so much for being on the line today. And I'll introduce you to my two colleagues who are on the phone today. So I'm lucky enough to have Alison Elmore, a corporate records manager from Holland, with me today, as well as Wendy McLean from Valera. And instead of doing the injustice of butchering some very well-established careers, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Wendy, would you like to jump in and give us a little bit of background?
Sure, Cal. Hi, everybody. I am in Texas, where it is sunny and mid-60s today. I hope that y'all are all having equally good weather. A little about my career. It spans a number of industries. I've worked in government. I've worked in petrochemical, engineering, and healthcare. I'm currently back in the energy sector and am really growing from a paper-based records management type of focus into managing a really broadly scoped RIM and IG program. So I hope that some of my experiences will be of interest to you today as we talk through this slide deck.
Fantastic, Wendy. No, absolutely thrilled to have you here, and I know those experiences are going to be of great use to everyone on the line. And Alison, would you like to jump in as well and give us a brief background?
Sure, thank you. I'm Alison Elmore. I work for Olin Corporation. I've been there 20 years. I have been the corporate records officer for the last 5 years. We most of the time have been just Canada and North America. Recently, we've gone global, so that's kind of my focus and concentration. We have 3 divisions basically that I work with, and that is caustic chlorine, epoxy, and Winchester ammunition. So it's a big, varied content there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And once again, thank you for being here. So as you can see, we have a pretty broad spectrum when it comes to experience today, and hopefully we'll be able to enlighten everyone with some shared and often differing perspectives as well. But thanks once again, guys. And with no further ado, we'll jump in. And anyone who has attended one of the ZL Tech webinars before is probably saying, I've definitely seen this before, and you would be right there in that. This is what we often like to start with when it comes to our webinars, especially with the records management field, because what I find interesting about this definition is not that it's necessarily changed over the past 6 months or even year, but it's the perspective of me of the exact same words that have a completely different meaning just because of the environment and the changes that we're dealing with. And so I'll give you a brief introduction because I know it's on all of your screens, but just Information management refers to a set of activities required for systematically controlling the creation, distribution, use, maintenance, and disposition of information maintained as evidence of business activities and transactions, with a key focus really being on evidence. And for me, I think we could take this a number of different roads, but I promised at the top that I would let the two ladies on the phone do most of the talking. So as individuals that obviously do get to fulfill the role of a records manager or information manager, what's your perspective on this? And Alison, I wanted to bring you in first and just, obviously there's a lot of words with a bit of a generic meaning, but for your day-to-day activities, what do you take out of this definition for what it means for you and your team?
A lot of work. I think that, going systematically, going from paper to technology, electronic, is totally a thing all on its own. But when you add the word evidence in there for business activities, it brings in all of your legal issues tied with that. So, to put all that together and make sure that you're in compliance with every part or every area that you need to be, it's difficult to put it all together and maintain it.
I completely agree. And as you said, the transition from managing a physical store to an electronic store is an entirely different world, let alone expanding outside of just North America into Europe and dealing with some fairly well publicized regulations. So it's a lot coming at you at once. And I think that's why systematically is obviously an important word. But I don't want to steal that thunder from Wendy, because I know we'd had some previous discussions, and I think you were quite keen to emphasize the systematic side of it as well.
Yes, I would agree, but let me just riff off of what Alison was saying in regards to evidence. I think it's interesting what word is missing from this slide, and it's records. And so, that is one of the challenges, is we're no longer focused on records. We really are focused on evidence. But the thing that is the same is that we're going to approach this from a systematic way. And I probably overemphasize being systematic. In fact, my team would say that I say the word consistent probably 10 times a day. I'm always harping on that our processes around information management have to be documented. They have to be repeatable. And that's what's going to help us when it comes to supporting what's defensible. So I love that you've put the keyword out there as evidence, because I do think that is part of what's new here. But what I like is that there's also something old here, and we know how to do it as records managers. We know how to be systematic. We know how to document processes, and therefore we bring a consistency and defensibility to our programs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad you took it in that direction as well, because I think that really, in the current state that we're in across a number of different industries, there has to be a marriage of the old and the new. And I think, the consistency that was necessary in the past has not changed for the future. If anything, it's become more granular. But I'm also intrigued at the weight that the word evidence holds there, because even if we are talking about, defensible disposition, that's an evidence-based practice as well. And I'm quite glad you touched upon that. It's almost like you knew what was coming, because it's a perfect segue to where we'd like to go next, especially when we're going to be talking about a relationship with the legal folks in the room. But before we really dive into kind of the meat and the focus of this relationship that's starting to form across the records management and eDiscovery or legal business units, we want to kind of take a little bit of a step back and have a holistic view at what has changed. We jumped on here and mentioned that it's been a not tumultuous, but maybe exciting, maybe nerve-wracking, maybe all coupled into one last 12 to 18 months. And we really have seen a huge amount of change. But before we narrow our focus on one specific change, what else has really changed? And you might all guess that I'm probably going to talk a lot about regulation today, and I might be a little bit of a pesky European when it comes to privacy with this annoying accent that you hear talking at you. But it's hard to ignore that GDPR didn't play a huge part in changing what we're discussing today. Obviously, a regulation like this came in that we definitely hadn't seen stateside. There was a little bit of familiarity within Europe with the DPA, but the enforcement side we'd never seen before. So not only were we being asked to manage data in a manner that was different to previously, the level of granularity was different to anything we'd seen before. So it wasn't just changing our policies and changing our practices, it was actually implementing that. But then trying to implement that enterprise-wide and getting the buy-in from a number of business units and those relationships we're going to refer to today is an entirely different story. But slightly more homegrown and specific to some of the conversations I've had with our panelists is, what's going to happen stateside. Maybe we nervously or eagerly await the CCPA, or what really is going to happen on the federal data privacy law. Are we going to see a patchwork of state legislation, or is it really going to be something that is, nationwide, and it is a federally induced privacy law? And if we've seen anything with GDPR, it's that the beauty of data really is that it's boundless. It's hard to set policies and limit them to a geographic region. So we imagine that the best practice there would be a federal data privacy law, but there's lots of questions that still arise around that. So it's change that we've seen and obviously change that we envision. The other side is a slightly more historic change, but it's ever evolving, just like regulations, and that's the data type, in that we often within ZL refer to the big R and the little r, but it's really just an expansion of data types that you're being asked to manage, as an information or records manager on a daily basis. Previously compliance would traditionally handle the email side of things, or would be looking at just files, but obviously as technology expands, so does the expectation that we're really going to manage this data in a consistent manner, not just my emails, not just my files. We're starting to look at social media, internal messaging, external messaging, and so on and so forth. But how do we really enforce that and enact that consistently, and then with an evidence-based approach? So those are two that we've had discussions about, and we feel like they're consistent. But Alison, I know we've been talking for almost 2 years at this point, and I'm very well aware that leadership and so on and so forth are things that change, and those are experiences that you've been through. So I wanted to let you kind of just take the lead on both the leadership and security side of things here.
Yeah, well, I just feel with the major changes with GDPR, the technology is changing so fast. The volumes of data that are coming in faster than the speed of light. I mean, it's hard to keep up with everything. And now we are more as information managers. We have legal compliance, litigation management, business risks, operational efficiencies. We're not just involved with records management. I mean, it's all data, it's all information, and building those relationships and getting that communication going throughout the company, in previously was a little harder than it is now, because everybody has their attention on security and privacy and, our right to be forgotten. And so, it puts us in the forefront now and gives us more of a chance to get our words out and say, here's what we need. Let's work together in these groups. Let's get our, information governance going, and we can be proactive and work with those business units and build those relationships so that as things progress, then we can be ahead of the game versus trying to be reactive all the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't echo that anymore. And I think you just said it, in that there's so many moving parts that provide one hell of an opportunity, but it's keeping up with those moving parts to make sure that it is an opportunity. It's not something that's ultimately overwhelming. And I mean, what we've seen through some of our engagements is that, there's often a roadmap in place in which, rightly so, records has a huge part to play in and a huge seat at the table, but then we see a leadership change and often we spin in a different direction. So it's being able to adapt in an environment that seems to be ever changing and never slowing down to really grab onto that opportunity. And obviously the scrutiny is higher than ever, which has its merits, but also its perils. So I completely agree with that. And Wendy, I promise I'm not leaving you short by just leaving you one so-called bullet point, because this is really where we want to dive in today. But just on the eDiscovery side of thing, what do you see as the drivers of change that relate to both, RIM and the eDiscovery business units?
One thing that really struck me, and I might be late to realizing this, but the EDRM model, the eDiscovery reference model, when it started, when that was very first drafted in 2005, it didn't even have records management represented in the diagram. But then subsequent revisions started to kind of grow this idea, and it first started out with a box called records retention that morphed into records management, and then information management appeared in 2007, and finally in 2014 it was replaced with information governance. And what I think is significant about that, it it raises the awareness with a different subset of people outside of traditional records management, outside of um, our narrow playing field of records and information governance professionals, and it puts that awareness of information governance in front of people that are focused on eDiscovery. And so it gave us, I think, an opportunity to get that message of information governance in front of a different group of people. And to me, that has been an interesting step to get that awareness into that group. And I think it helps us then step into a relationship with folks that are working eDiscovery, our legal teams, and a whole new area to show how we can help.
Yeah, no, consistently, and again, I think that the overwhelming part of what you were saying there is really change. With the different even phrases that we use for it, really has always been a records management role, and obviously now tied into the larger group of information governance, wasn't necessarily ignored, but it wasn't fully understood the value of what could be brought to the table, and that's not necessarily to the fault of anybody there, but it's also very interesting that it's taken time to really get here, and we're starting to see with not necessarily just regulations, but business relationships internally, that we actually can be consistent and on the same path and on the same roadmap moving forward. It's only beneficial for one, business relationships, but also efficiency and consistency, which might be the key word of this presentation moving forward. So absolutely, I agree with everything that was said there. But as promised at the beginning, what we really want to focus on today is one of the drivers of change, which Wendy very well articulated there, and that's really the changes in the relationship between the records management side and the eDiscovery side, and that's a generic title on purpose, because it's really focusing on what can be referred to as they're very different business use depending on the organization. So, it could be your records team, it could be a specific eDiscovery team that is built up of just IT individuals or legals involved, however that might shape out. But it's really the records management and information management side as well as the eDiscovery team there. And we've discussed some of the changes that we've seen, and we're going to dive in deeper here. So I don't want to spend too long on any of the specific bullet points, because we will flesh them out. But I really do want to focus on the EDRM side of things and what that means, because obviously it's specific for a process here, which is the eDiscovery process, but it might be slightly different thinking, but maybe a little bit forward thinking, that information governance is almost a predecessor to everything we're trying to achieve here. Whether that is regulation, whether that is analytics, whether that is efficiency, it's having that clean data set and a centralized knowledge and know-how that can enforce a policy that's agreed upon across the board, and therefore we can consistently manage this data and this retention and erasure and so on and so forth. But what I really want to get to here with both of you is, what do we really think has already changed? And obviously tread lightly, because you know what's coming down the road. But I guess I'll throw that out to you, Alison. So just for you in a day-to-day interaction when it comes to both your team and the eDiscovery team, and I know with you there's quite a little bit of overlap there, but in the last year to 18 months, what for you is maybe just the one and not any further, but what for you has been the most predominant change between that relationship so far?
Historically, I think, with separate lines of business, you did see things that were very siloed. You had your overall divisions, and then you have your businesses within those divisions, and they all like to have their information and their data in their little silos, all separate. With the drivers of change, we can't really do that any longer. We have to have everything available at one time so that everybody can find it. So I think we've moved away from those silos. We're coming into a uniform, more controlled environment where, you put your controls in place. You have to have your roadmap, your data maps, work really close with legal and your IT and your business units to know where all your information is. And one thing, even though technology changes and we're focused on what technology can bring us, the systems is not what makes our organizations compliant. It's more that they support our compliance controls. So we've got to have those controls in place in order for the technology to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. Again, it seems to be coming back, and I'm definitely stealing this from Wendy. So I hope there's not too much of your team on the line that's getting sore ears from hearing the same word over and over again. But it really harps back to consistency and that idea that the traditional view that we really can operate as two separate entities with entirely different goals and ultimately achieve success for one overarching umbrella business just doesn't seem to make sense anymore. And that's because we're being asked to interact in ways that previously didn't necessarily exist or even make sense at that standpoint. So I absolutely agree. It was almost two opposites, operating under the same roof. So I completely echo that statement there. But then I guess, Alison, Wendy, excuse me, what I'd like to hear from you, and this is looking backwards rather than looking forward, but traditionally speaking, and obviously you don't have to speak to specific initiatives, but when there were records-based projects or initiatives on the table, was it traditional that legal and eDiscovery would be involved, rather not from a signing a contract standpoint or dotting I's and crossing the T's, but purely from this technology might work for us as well? Or in your experience, was that often a completely separate initiatives that were handled by the individual groups themselves?
Definitely, I have seen in the past disconnect. In a prior job, I can give a really good example of how separate we thought in terms of our goals and our vision. The records program was focused on minimizing budget, minimizing footprint, getting rid of whether it was paper or electronic, really applying retention and disposition rules. And they were doing it from a very budget-focused frame of mind. And in their world, they were thinking these were big numbers. And to go to the legal folks and to talk with the legal folks and to talk about the budget dollars that they were looking at in terms of risk avoidance, it paled in comparison. They said, we don't care that you could save X thousands of dollars. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar case. So just keep doing what you're doing. And to me, that's just, it was an eye-opening experience, and I have kept that front of mind going forward into new opportunities and different jobs to remember who it is you're talking to and what their goals are and how different they are. And so bringing it together and understanding that we might be using different vocabulary, different tools, different approaches, we need to really kind of know that in order to get on the same page and be an integrated part of a new kind of team.
Yeah, no, completely. And I really like that point of different vocabulary and different tools, because it sounds a little bit strange at first if you haven't been put in the environment that, someone who might sit as close as 5 or 6 desks away from you, or however the structure is internally, uses entirely different vocabulary for exactly the same thing. And I know you'd aforementioned that, search was a good example of that. And it's absolutely true. Search can mean something very difficult in an information management and records management point of view to what it can mean from an eDiscovery perspective. So I think, we all share that traditionally these were two very isolated and separate groups that often had to call upon each other just because, use cases were sometimes similar, but that has drastically changed to what we look at right now and where those similarities reside. But what I'm keen to do here is really get some audience engagement with a little bit of a poll. So I know you're all more than capable of reading, but just so that you can take a look, how often did you as an individual, and I imagine the majority of people on the phone sit in the records management department, interact with your legal and eDiscovery team in an average week? And we're not necessarily looking for a crisis management week, but just your average week traditionally. And I'm hoping that you can focus on kind of prior to 2018, maybe looking at 2016, 2017, and really the whole way from there, the whole way through to the total part of the team. So with the two ladies on the phone, both Wendy and Alison, and Wendy, I'll come back to you. So traditionally, how did this look for you? And then today, how does it look, if you could take both sides of the coin?
Sure. Prior to 2018, I would say, I wouldn't go so far as to say never, but it was rare that we would have a lot of engagement. That has definitely changed. I think that's part of the reason why you invited me to participate on the call. That change and what's going on and how I see that going forward, I really believe that we will have regular interactions. They'll be scheduled. There will be a true business need or reason behind that, and it's going to build a stronger collaborative team going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alison, I assume it's similar enough on your side?
Very similar. We do interact a very large part with our legal, only because we handle a lot of the legal holds through my department. So we are on a constant communication level with them, which I think definitely helps the team.
Mm-hmm. No, completely. And I assume that our poll has closed. Unfortunately, my laptop is not sharing the results with me. Can my two panelists see the results there? What do we have in front of us?
Yes, I can see the results.
Yeah, Wendy, would you like to go? Sorry, go ahead. Wendy, would you like to go?
Sure.
Thank you.
Never is listed at 35%. 2 or 3 business interactions, 25%. Multiple times with biweekly meetings, 4%. Ongoing dialogue, 18%. And being part of the team is also 18%.
Interesting. I mean, I think there's two sides to this. I don't want to come out and be excited, because obviously when we're not seeing a huge amount of traditional interaction there, it's not necessarily a positive. But at the same time, I think if we'd had opposite results, the rest of our presentation might have been a little bit redundant. So it's fair to say that those were expected there. And obviously the two ladies have shared very similar experiences, and that traditionally speaking, 35% of us are saying never, and I believe it was 25% around the 2 to 3 business interactions. And for me, that's not surprising, and I think we've shared so far why we understand that was pretty much the case. Obviously, separate entities referring to separate business units and incentives and roadmaps and so on and so forth. But what we really plan to do from here is demonstrate, as we have done so far, why that has changed, but also why we can really take advantage of that and really see that as a positive. So what we're going to do from here on is look at the drivers of change that we've mentioned already, but how they're specific to this relationship. So not just records management as a whole, but obviously how have they really manipulated and changed this relationship and forced us to hopefully have these increased reactions in the future. So without a huge amount of focus on GDPR and privacy regulation, a lot of people initially said to me that they saw striking similarities between a subject access request and a litigation search. And I see the similarities there, I really do, in that, there's probably custodian based and we're searching for an isolated amount of information. But from a GDPR perspective, we aren't necessarily limited by what we would be within a case. And what I mean by that is finite dates that we often get involved in litigation, or that it's usually e-communication data. GDPR has kind of said, no, I see you eDiscovery, and I'm going to take you 2 pegs higher. I'm going to expand the use case, and I'm going to ask you to look further and deeper than ever before, and not necessarily define a specific time frame or even a specific set of data that I'm going to ask you to be looking for. But at the same time, I'm going to ask you to produce all of that in a month. So what we've really seen from our side of the table is an increased incentive to centralize all these processes, which means the two business units have only had to come closer together than ever before, and really get on the same page of how we're managing this data, because if we're managing it more efficiently, then we're finding it more efficiently, whatever that finding use case is. So that's really what I've seen out of the regulation side so far, and I can only envision that it's going to increase itself further. On the data sources, Alison, I know you touched upon kind of the legal hold side of things, but what have you seen so far with kind of either an increase in data sources, differing types, or what you're being asked to find, and so on and so forth in the last couple of years?
I think the data sources is growing, just like the volume of data and the technologies. You know, you have your business areas that use their own applications. You have, you know, your divisions that want to use their own applications. You know, we have email, we have social media, we have our cloud-based, you know, we have finance systems and our web portals and our document management systems. And, you know, how do you bring all of these systems together to search for content? I mean, we're not just searching for, you know, structured records or for even unstructured records. I mean, we're looking for content and data information when it comes to some of these, you know, privacy, personal identification. We're not just looking for social security numbers or birth dates. You know, we're looking for addresses. We're looking for telephone numbers. We're looking at anything that can tie to a person. And sometimes you really have to dig deep to get that information. And that's where the technology is going to bring it together and something that can interface with all of these different kinds of applications.
Yeah, completely. I really agree there, and I think that's what's been exciting, but also an education process through these privacy regulations, in that, you know, it has expanded for looking for something that simply identifies a custodian in the case to simply identifies a person. And as you said, you know, it's outside of phone numbers and email addresses. It can take itself to a wedding invitation, a birthday invite, a home address, and then obviously, once we got to that level of complexity, that can be spelt in a variety of different ways. So it's not a simple proximity or keyword search anymore. It really does have to be very complex. And, you know, as we said, there's a few of us on the line, I'm sure, who have often taken the settlement route, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But what gets hard here on the GDPR side is it's not really an option. You know, you have to prove, like we said, consistently with an evidence-based approach that you have done what's been asked of you as an organization. Wendy here, apologies. I know you've touched upon the EDRM, and I'm almost touting you as our EDRM expert, so forgive me for that. But I wanted you, before we jump into a visual representation of the EDRM, just kind of give us a little bit more of a spin on why that has been a specific driver of change right here for the RIM and eDiscovery side.
Well, as I said, Cal, I think it's really because it puts information governance right up front. I mean, it's the first box on the model. It's in your face. And not only is it the first box, but it no longer just says information governance. It's actually the IG reference model embedded into the EDRM. And then the EDRM.net folks took it a step further, and their description, what they call that, just in their super shorthand, is getting your electronic house in order to mitigate risk and expenses should eDiscovery become an issue. And I think that is really interesting because they're focusing on what we've been trying to do for so long as RIM professionals, getting things in order. And they go so far as to say from initial creation to its final disposition. So they've really summed it up and they've put it in front. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm keen to get to the model itself. And obviously you can all see this came from eDRM.net. So I promise we're not trying to steal that as any of our own. And Wendy, I think you did a fantastic job of really laying out what it means to have kind of this electronic house in order and why it makes sense for it to be up front. And what I'm keen to get a perspective of you both here, and Wendy, you've done a fantastic job of introducing what was previously a pretty abstract process before we brought up this graphic, is to get an understanding of where you play today. So obviously, Alison, for me, if you take this visual information governance, I think it's a given that we all sit in that space. But when you look at the EDRM from left to right, from identify the whole way through, what boxes do you currently sit in as a records manager? Where do you spend most of your time in this eDiscovery process? And if you'd like to, where do you see that changing or maybe moving the whole way across to the right within the next, 6 to 12 months?
Oh, let's see. As a records manager, I think my experience has been mostly between legal, risk, records management, and now with IT. We have probably within the last couple of years really reeled that in to our policy integration, trying to get one policy, uniform across. The same thing with the process transparency. Which helps because it helps the communication. It helps us know what we have. So when we do have a search and we do have a request come in, we can work with legal and say, hey, we know where that is. We can get it. We do know when it's supposed to, when we're supposed to have it, or if we're supposed to have it. It's easy to, preserve those things. It's easy to collect them. Having all of this information governance and this electronic discovery model helps us guide us to make sure that we're doing our jobs so we have the communication ready to be able to do left to right. Because if you have everything on the left, the right is very easy.
Sure. No, that totally right, and can agree with you more what you're saying there. If you can, like we said, get that house in order, it becomes a little bit easier. And then when did you kind of share the view of where you currently sit in these boxes, or anything different there?
Very similar. A couple things I wanted to add to that, though, is, earlier we were talking about being totally different business units and being siloed. One of the things about having the IG model embedded here that I think helps bring us together is you can see where our focus is. So, for example, RIM and legal and privacy and security are focusing on minimizing risk, which might be a little different from IT focusing on efficiency. So you can start to build that shared vocabulary and those shared goals really by just talking through the information governance model. But in terms of bringing value to the right side of this model, I think that RIM has a role to play definitely in the identification. I think a role to play in the preservation because we can help with the searching for building legal holds. Certainly can help collect. And then those RIM programs that may have a full-scale imaging operations built into their RIM program may even be helpful in supporting the production of the documents. So I think that depending on where you are and how you are situated in your organization, you could play a role in a number of these boxes leading off to the right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what might be interesting if we were to revisit this in a year, how far we might have progressed from the left to the right, just from a purely involvement standpoint. It would be even interesting to do the complete opposite and see where we were a year ago. So I completely agree. It'll be very interesting to watch what ultimately has changed there and what are going to be the drivers as well. So we're very keen, and I know you've all been on the phone for a little while now to get everyone involved again. So we're going to open this poll up right now and get some involvement here that's saying, since this has been added, so looking forward to, very recent 6-8 months since we have added IG to the EDRM, has your relationship with the legal team changed at all? And it's similar to our last question or where we took it, but what we're hoping is that this is a pretty big driver of change. And if that hasn't happened yet, that hopefully it will. And Wendy and Alison, I know you talked to this already, but I guess what I'm interested in is, when this happened, when IG was kind of finally recognized at the front of the EDRM, is that a huge driver for change that you saw internally, or was it something that kind of crept its way in and was a bit gradual? And Alison, you can take that away first.
I think it was a bit gradual. We get to hearing slowly about the regulation changes and what the expectations are. And still, everyone's talking about it in their different areas. And then as the time gets closer, especially to GDPR, on the kickoff date, it's like then it starts bringing together and people start working together faster. And so, it was gradual, and I think now that it's in place, that it's moving a lot faster.
Yeah, yeah. And Wendy, would you echo a similar sentiment?
Absolutely. And, I see that this is just going to continue to increase.
Yeah, no, I agree, and we'll close those polls up and take a look at those results in a second. But I do agree, and Alison, would you do me a favor again and mind just reading out those results, because unfortunately I can't see them on my screen.
Sure, sure. So you have no change at 51%, minimal increase in the eDiscovery process at 24%, significant increase in involvement in the eDiscovery, 18%, and fully integrated into eDiscovery process at 6%.
Interesting, very interesting. I would absolutely love to hear the perspective from those who are in that 6% who are fully integrated. That sounds like a pretty great place to be, and definitely some forward thinkers. But again, not necessarily surprised there. I mean, 51% is quite overwhelming at the no change mark, and I hope really that we can start to sit down as what may be still separate teams and understand that there's a real reason for us to be sharing a perspective and a roadmap forward, because it definitely makes sense for us to be heading in a uniform direction, which naturally and gratefully so leads us to, how have these things changed? And we really have talked about it. We've got 50% of people that said they haven't seen any of this. So maybe this is more of a futuristic prospect for them. So, Alison, you have talked upon it, kind of the recognition of dual purpose. You've started to manage those, legal holds and so on in perspective. But, talk to that a little further for me. Where are you starting to see that middle ground with the legal team and so on?
Well, I think as we look at what our, company objectives and policies are, then looking at what, the legal team expects and how they want to achieve their objectives and how they want to get their policies and procedures out, we can jump onto that, and do our strategy plans according to kind of the way they're going. So it brings us in their realm and keeps us there. And I think it's up to us to show them the value of our information, and how valuable it is to control that information. Sometimes the attorneys at their level don't think down at what it really takes for the records managers to be able to control that information and have it at, the drop of a hat like they expect.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think, that familiarity creates a little bit of more understanding and maybe even sympathy at the same time. And obviously, if we're utilizing a similar approach, we're only going to better understand the pitfalls and the benefits of the systems that we're involved in, which is hopefully, going to foster better relationships and more efficient processes in the future.
But Cal, Reza, I'm just interrupting for a second. We're not seeing your screen at this point.
Oh, let me see if I can fix that. I do apologize. You can hear me fine though, correct?
Can hear you fine.
Okay, let me see.
Apologize to the audience on this. Just wanted to make sure that we get the slides up before we go too much further. There we go. Thank you, Cal.
Fantastic. And everyone on the line, I apologize there. That must have been a fault on my end, but thank you, Mike, for giving me the heads up. So please do shout if anything goes awry again, but hopefully it won't. So yes, Alison, just echoing exactly what you were saying there. And then Wendy, where I was keen to bring you in is what something that maybe not fairly or broadly enough has been titled file management here on this page. But that really is to the increase, similar to what Alison was saying, the expansive use case of data. So what was kind of your thought around this subject here?
I definitely see that there's going to be a larger part to play. And I think that, RIM will begin working side by side with their legal team members. I think it's also, if I can bring back the word consistency, it's going to be important for RIM to document search protocols, to document, you know, retention schedules and historical retention schedules, and be able to prove what the program looked like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There are things that we do that we know the value of, that we need to bring into the forefront, that comes, into this bullet point file management. The classification, the retention, the storage, those sorts of things are important, but it's also extending RIM beyond those traditional records repositories and playing a key role in the electronic world, as well as some of those other things that were on that EDRM slide. You're really getting involved in legal hold and getting involved in some of the other components that may have been outside of our traditional normal scope.
Yes, absolutely. I fully agree. And I'm going to touch upon a question that we received very quickly here from an individual named Angela Wright. So, Angela, thank you for your question. I know there's two parts to this. I'm going to take the first one here that was, are there privacy regulations outside of Europe, New York, and California? And I think this fits in quite nicely here, in that the idea that things have already changed is really an early adoption standpoint. Our first movers that have gone and looked at GDPR and said, it's fully worth us to change the way we manage our house as quickly as possible. And I promise you a large portion of individuals that we talk to on a daily basis aren't at that point. So, have we missed the boat there? Well, I don't think so, because they're not going anywhere anytime soon. But also, GDPR used to be the ceiling, and we're now starting to see that that's a bit more of a building block, in that other countries like India, like Brazil, like Argentina are starting to release their own interpretations or their own perspectives on a law like GDPR, because they want to be able to, from a data perspective, still interact with Europe on a daily basis. So, Angela, that's very brief, and I will follow up with some more information if you'd like it. But yes, there is a real appetite, so to speak, around the world for legislation that's being driven by, what happened in Europe with GDPR. But I'm conscious that we don't have a wealth of time left. So I want to get to what hopefully is the biggest positive out of today's presentation. And it's really, how to take advantage of the remaining opportunity. 51% of you on the line have said that there's been no change. So for me, yes, that's a negative, but how can we spin that to a positive and really see that as an opportunity? Regulation is something that I've talked upon here. It's a conversation that we can't avoid. It's something that's going to affect all business groups, whether we operate in Europe or not, as I just mentioned. But that being said, I have two individuals that deal with this within two fantastic organizations on a daily basis. So ladies, I'd really like to give you the floor here and just, feel free to take the regulation route. But, Wendy, starting with you, what do you see as the biggest opportunity remaining, or how to take advantage of that?
There's just so many, it's hard to pick one. But I can tell you what my focus is going to be for the next foreseeable future, is to get really familiar with how to be on top of the regulations that are coming. So, I'm not an attorney, but I sit by a lot of brilliant attorneys, and making friends with them and learning how to really understand the regulations and interpret that for what will it mean to us. And that's where I'm going to be spending a lot of my time.
Yes, absolutely. And Alison, would you concur, or a different point of view for you?
I do concur some, but I already work with legal at such a high level that I think my attention needs to be more at the IT technology level. Just because we are doing the consistent, retention across the different applications and wanting to do the centralized searches, and I want to be proactive and show everybody that, hey, we are out there when you need us, and that we're a benefit and a value to these business units, that we can assist them to increase some of their effectiveness and their efficiencies with the data that they already use. We just need to show them, they just need to let us show them how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree, and I'm very happy that we have at least a slightly different opinion there, just to demonstrate that there are a multitude of opportunities. And I think we could really talk all day on what is a pretty basic slide here, but how deep we could dive about the opportunities that these changes have really presented. One of which is a little bit closer to home than some of the abstract regulations, even if it might be caused by that. And there's 2 slides left, but I'm conscious of giving Mike some time. So what I'm going to do is skip to this final one here, and it's not a ZL plug at all in that, but obviously, Angela, to get to your final question about how do I manage uniform retention when I have so many different systems to manage, and that's a question and a bit of a brain scratcher that we get often. And the hard thing about that is, if I can't apply consistent policy, then how can I enforce consistent policy? And if I'm managing data across a number of different systems, then do I even want it to be consistent? And I'm not going to dive into this because I'm not going to do what is a very complex architecture system any justice, but there's a way to approach that where we don't have to necessarily move away from all these systems that our end users are familiar with and use on a daily basis, because educating a workforce, we know, is something that really doesn't happen. Nobody wants to stay 5 to 10 minutes, let alone 2 hours late, just to classify their information. But I will definitely reach out to anybody who wants to dive in a little bit deeper here, and please feel free to get in touch. But as our hosts are always so gracious, I want to return the favor and give Mike some time to run through some very exciting upcoming events. So with that, Mike, I will pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Cal, and thank you to Allison and Wendy as well for a great webinar. Thank you for your time and your content. Just a couple of words on some upcoming events. The MER Sapient webinar series is really filling out this year. Our calendar is filling rapidly with some very, very interesting subjects and webinars, and I encourage you to sign up for all of them, and certainly the ones that are of interest to you, make sure you get registered. February 5th is the next webinar, an overview of ACC's new records management maturity model. We'll be talking about the 5 keys of successful IG programs with Robert Smallwood on February 19th. On March 7th, from Taylor Swift to Tom Brady to Donald Trump, maybe Tom Brady will be yet again another Super Bowl champ by then. The legal eDiscovery challenges of social media. I think that's a fascinating webinar from David Horrigan from Relativity. And on the 14th of March, Level Up, access, align, and automate your information governance. And I think that'll be an interesting presentation as well. Want to remind you again, the MER conference takes place May the 20th through the 22nd in Chicago. Go to our website to find out more. You can look at our agenda. Our program agenda is already posted. We have a number of wonderful speakers and very, very relevant and compelling topics. We have pre-cons on Sunday, May 19th. We have networking opportunities, including evening receptions. We have roundtables, solution showcase sessions, all for a very low price, and that price is reduced right now with our early bird pricing. So please take advantage of that. Check us out at the MER conference. You can check out ZL Technologies at that conference. They'll be exhibiting, and they have several sessions as well, and you can talk to them in much greater depth at the conference. So with that, I do want to also mention that there is a handout to this webinar, and some of you have been experiencing some technical problems. Technology is fickle, as we're learning today. If you've had some difficulties with the handout and you're not able to download it, we will be sending out a link with the ability to download that handout after the webinar is complete. Okay, so with that, Cal, any further thoughts before we close?
Yeah, no, so Mike, I mean, I guess my first take from that is that I obviously need to up my title game, because there's some very exciting titles. So I hope everyone managed to jump onto those webinars. What I'm going to do with questions here, I have a fantastic ZL team on the line taking down all of your questions. So I promise the relevant panelists will get back to you with a fully coherent answer for that. So with no further ado, thank you to everyone for attending today. Allison and Wendy, it was a real pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you all soon. Thanks ever so much.